Hello folks, welcome back. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. What follows is the results of an interview on Newsroom Africa between a Canadian lawyer who deals with immigration from South Africa to Canada, talking about the U.S. refugee program. And it's an interview full of distraction, outright lies, misstatements, and deception. And I'm not really sure what the intent is here other than to mislead people. And it's really tragic that this sort of thing makes it onto mainstream media without anyone to refute it. Let's just take a look at what's said in this interview with this Canadian attorney, Nicholas Erasmus, and the interviewer on Newsroom Africa. And without further ado, let's pick it up right here.
A Canadian immigration consultant has warned some members of the Afrikaans community in South Africa against applying for asylum in the United States.
Well, first off, there's a problem right there. The offer from Donald Trump is not for asylum. You can't get asylum from South Africa. It doesn't work that way. Asylum law requires that you come to America legally and then apply for asylum because of a reason that you're being persecuted back home in your home country. You don't get asylum from South Africa. That's nonsense. Total fiction here. So let's just deal with that right now.
Nicholas Avramis says making a refugee claim to the U.S. or any other country impacts future applications to other countries, including Canada.
Well, that's only germane if you're applying for refugee status in a second country after having been denied in a first country. Otherwise, it has no impact. It doesn't matter if you've applied for refugee status in America if you're going to apply to Canada. Why would you apply to both countries? You apply to the one that you want to go to, that you hope to go to, and that's the one you get. Otherwise, it has no impact whatsoever.
You've actually gotten a lot of, or a few calls, obviously you can give me the data of that, a few calls saying, can you help me apply for asylum to move to the U.S.?
Again, this lady is very confused. Why are people calling a Canadian lawyer in South Africa to ask about asylum, a process that can only be applied for inside the United States? It's not germane. This is about refugee status, and it's an unusual situation because it will be an odd one in which we call this in-country refugee. You're not legally a refugee unless you fled your home country and sought safe haven in a neighboring country. That's a refugee. But under this program, like we've done in Cuba, like we've done in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the U.S. government would grant you refugee status because of the dire circumstances that imperil your life and liberty. Therefore, you're granted refugee legal status, not asylum, refugee legal status, a very big distinction legally. And these people have no idea what they're talking about.
Asking questions about this new refugee and asylum policy that the U.S. has come out with.
Again, the United States has not come out with a new asylum program or process. That's fiction. This gentleman's an attorney and he doesn't know any better. It's a refugee program. It's an offer, not an asylum program. Get your facts straight, buddy.
You know, refugee and asylum claims are part of immigration, okay, in any country.
No, they're not. An asylum seeker is not an immigrant. An asylum seeker is someone who's seeking protection from persecution after they've legally entered your country and then turned to authorities for asylum. A refugee is someone who's escaped to a safe haven in a neighboring state and is also seeking help from persecution. They're not immigrants. The net effect is that they wind up immigrating, essentially, for a period of time, usually forever, but they're not immigrants as such. An immigrant is a very different status, and mixing these words confuses people from a legal perspective. And that's a disgrace for an attorney to do such a thing. This gentleman knows better than to do what he's doing.
And they're really governed by the 1951 Refugee Convention Act, which says, that framework basically says that, you know, if you have a fear of prosecution or serious harm through torture and cruelty, you can make an asylum claim. And that's usually the framework globally for it.
Once again, factually incorrect. That may be the global standard that was established for refugees as a consequence of the events of the Second World War, but that is not what governs refugee status in the United States. What governs that is the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1981, or 1980. Immigration and Nationality Act, INA. Yes, specifically the definition of refugee is located in Section 101, Paragraph A, Subparagraph 42 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. That is what determines who gets refugee status in the United States, and then it's applied to each specific program in each instance, whether it's normal refugee status where people flee to a safe haven, or it's an in-country program like Cuba and Bosnia and Herzegovina have been in the past, and South Africa will be. As far as who qualifies, under U.S. law, very specific, you must be located outside the United States. You must be of special humanitarian concern to the United States, and Donald Trump in his executive order has made you of special humanitarian concern, specifically saying that countless government policies designed to dismantle equal opportunity in employment, education, and business, and hateful rhetoric and government actions fueling disproportionate violence against racially disfavored landowners. And he goes on to say in the second portion, here for who it applies to, it is a U.S. refugee admissions program for Afrikaners in South Africa who are victims of unjust racial discrimination. Your category, your case, your group of people has been identified by that executive order. So I don't know what this gentleman's talking about, and neither does he.
But one thing people don't understand is that when you make this claim or when you seek asylum or refugee status in any country, this will follow you for life.
This will follow you for life. What exactly is he implying here? Is he trying to give the impression that being a refugee is bad, it's evil? That's nonsense. The international community has recognized the need to protect refugees because of what we saw in the Second World War. Therefore, this is not a bad thing. It sticks with you for life. That's nonsense. He makes it sound like you've committed some crime. Also, while we're at it, a government cannot strip you of your statehood and make you stateless because you become a refugee. That's also against international norms, just to make that clear. Sticks with you for life, utter nonsense. Number one, oftentimes this is for a specific period of time or until a condition is changed, and then you're expected to return to your home of origin. In the case of South Africa, like Liberians, you're never going home once you come here. The ANC is not going to change its racist laws. The ANC is not going to share power with ethnic minorities. The ANC is going to continue the national democratic revolution till the cows come home and the country collapses around them. But they'll still be stealing from it. So this is nonsense. Utter nonsense. It doesn't stay with you forever. It's not stigma. You're protected. You're given protection by the country that hosts you. What a crock of horse manure. This is disgraceful. This gentleman is implying that having refugee status is bad, and you don't want that. Well, if your life is in peril, if you're a gay man in Damascus in fear of being thrown off a roof because of your sexual orientation, it's a bit late to wait until after you've been dropped off a roof to request refugee status. If you flee to Turkey, get there and apply for it. Ridiculous what this man is saying.
And what does that mean? Well, when you go to make an application for a visitor visa to the UK, study permit to Australia, immigration officials are going to ask you, have you been denied a visa? Have you applied for refugee status? And usually the threshold for immigration officers is to determine whether you can abide by your temporary visa and status, whether you plan to return to your home country.
Whether you plan to return to your home country, that's utter nonsense. If you go for a student visa to study in the UK, your status, whether you're going to return to South Africa, isn't germane. Why would it matter? You have permanent residency once you've applied for the green card in the States. In the United States, you are a resident of the United States. You are going as a resident to the United Kingdom, to Australia to study or to travel or to visit family. There's no stigma. Immigration officers aren't going to ask you if you're ever going to go back to South Africa or back to Myanmar or back to Gaza. That's ridiculous. No. The only time that comes into play is if you come from your home country and you've been denied a refugee status and then you try to leave. Well, then it plays. See what's happening here. Very deceptive and dishonest and disingenuous. What the gentleman is implying is that if you apply for refugee status to the United States and you're a South African and you're denied, then later you decide to go to Canada, well, then it might in fact have an impact. That's true. Because they may view this as you not trying to go there to study abroad or to visit family, but trying to escape because you're unsuccessful escaping from another country or to another country, the U.S. There it would apply. But this is nonsense. If you have refugee status, it has no impact on when you travel. Willfully dishonest.
If you've made a refugee claim, you've declared that you want to leave your home country, in this case South Africa, and you plan to never return.
Once again, that's total horse manure. Liberians were granted temporary refugee status in the early 1990s because of the Civil War. That Civil War ended in 2003. They are still here. They've never left. Almost every one of them is still in America. And every time that their temporary status comes up, they lobby Washington and it gets extended. And they're still here. And they can go live in Liberia. I lived in Liberia. I rebuilt the armed forces of Liberia. It was perfectly safe for me to live there 2007, 2008, and go back there again in 2018. It's a safe country. There's no reason for Liberians to be in America, but here they are 35 years later, still in America. Most of them not even trying to become American citizens. Their offspring have, but they haven't. So this is total nonsense. You don't indicate you're never intending to go back to your country. And even if you did come to America with refugee status and then go to Australia to study, with the intention of never returning to South Africa. Well, how does that matter to Australia? What does Canberra care that you're never going back to South Africa? It isn't germane to your entry into Canberra. It is if you've been denied a visa to a country. You always have to answer those questions honestly, whether it's a tourist visa or it's a school visa or it's refugee status. You have to answer those questions. But this is just nonsense. How do these people get on television? It's shocking.
So it's something that's going to follow you and something that you're going to always have to explain during your travels.
No, it's not going to follow you. Again, it's not a scarlet letter. You haven't committed adultery and got caught in colonial New England. Hester Prynne, this is ridiculous. It doesn't follow you. If you're denied a visa for a country, that always follows you, at least until 10 years or so, and your passport expires, and then you're out of the system. But this is ridiculous. He's making refugee status sound like it's a scarlet letter, like you've done something wrong. Total nonsense. This is, wow, this is beyond the pale. And she's just licking it all up, absorbing it, loving it, because it fits her narrative.
This is a policy announcement that came out last month through an executive order, right? No program has been announced. We do not know the specifics.
Well, Mr. Rasmus, you got something correct. Nothing has been announced, which is what I've been saying all along. So people like you that are misleading others about the generalities of refugee status and refugee application and finance, and you're not doing that, but others doing that, lying to people, misleading people all over in the government of South Africa, in the media in South Africa, even the media in America. This is shameful, absolutely shameful. There is no program. There are no status. We don't even know the definition of Afrikaner. President Trump put it in his executive order, and then the American embassy in Hatfield on the following Monday said ethnic minorities, which is something I predicted was likely going to happen. Go back and watch the digits. You can watch my first broadcast about 2 hours after President Trump announced this on February 7th, and I said in the early moments of that video, it would likely be for a broader group than just Afrikaners. But this is just nonsense what this guy's saying. How many times I've said nonsense? I'm going to start using profanity here in a moment.
Will this lead to a green card? Will this lead to U.S. citizenship? How long will the processing time take?
Those are all very good questions by Mr. Erasmus, questions I've also raised, but he's also doing it in a leading fashion to give the impression that it will be something that's not good. So will it lead to a green card? Well, normally it does. You have to apply for a green card. He ought to know that. If you come to the United States under the refugee program, you must apply for a green card within the first 12 months. So will it lead to a green card? You damn skip it will. So don't confuse people. That's the law. Look it up. Immigration Nationality Act. It's right there. Go to the USCIS website and it will confirm that information. That's number one. So what happens after that? Well, we don't know. That's right, because the program has been announced. But don't mislead people, man. Stop with the nonsense.
We've all seen that things in the United States change every 4 years. New government comes in, the policy changes, the tenor changes.
All right, do you see what he's done there? So, Liberians came here in 1990 under George Herbert Walker Bush, granted temporary relief for 3 years. Then Bill Clinton was president for 8 years. They stayed here. Then George Bush was president for 8 years. They stayed here. Then Obama for 8 years. They stayed here. Then Trump for 4 years. They stayed here. Then Biden for 4 years. They stayed here. And now Trump is president again, and they're still here. He's trying to scare you into believing that, well, the policy will change, the governments will change. They can't just kick you out of the country. You've done nothing wrong unless you've committed fraud to gain your status or lied. And also, he's ignoring the fact that immigrants after 5 years can apply to become citizens. And many do. And once you become a citizen, your previous status is irrelevant. You're not a refugee. You're an American citizen with the full rights and protections of an American citizen carrying a blue tourist passport around the world. That's the gold standard. What a bunch of nonsense. And if you don't become a citizen, you're a permanent resident. Unless until you can return home safely. And if you can't, you get to stay here. So just be honest, buddy.
We see this all the time in our practice.
Do you?
People being rejected for visas in Canada because they failed to note that they were refused for a visa before.
Well, yeah, my friend. If you apply for a visa and you fail to mention that you've been turned down for a visa, well, of course that could have a detrimental impact on whether you get a visa to come in a country. That applies to any country and has nothing to do with refugee status. People from Mozambique that try to go to the UK or the United States are denied a visa. It's in the system. And if they don't report it, then they're considered untrustworthy and liars. So what are you getting at here? Wait till you hear what he says next.
They apply for refugee status. And they take that stuff very seriously. And
I should hope so.
when you make this type of claim, especially for a family that has young children.
Especially for a family that has young children. You see where this is going now? This is truly fear-mongering. That's what we see here, fear-mongering, trying to frighten you by attacking the concept of what could happen to your children, which is why many people want asylum, to save their children from the carnage that's happening around them, whether it's in Sudan, Somalia, or South Africa, wherever it might be.
Also be on the children's record.
Also be on the children's record. Seriously? First off, children typically get passports for 5 years, not 10 years. So most people who come here are probably going to apply for citizenship after 5 years. This is just nonsense. It's not a stigma. It's not a black mark being a refugee. It's protected status. He won't mention that. He's not being honest with you. He keeps trying to conflate asylum and immigration with refugee status. They're not the same, at least not in America. Who knows in Canada, but that's not the case in America.
So you have to be careful in terms of making these claims, and down the road you will have to answer for them.
You have to be careful in making these claims, and down the road you'll have to answer for them. Why? Did you commit a criminal act? Did you do something inappropriate? No. Once again, being a refugee is not a bad thing. It's not a wonderful thing because you've had to flee your home. But it's not a crime. It's not a stain. It's quite the opposite. This guy's making out this is a horrible thing. It's not. My goodness.
And if you fail to answer them, specifically in a country like Canada, and you fill out your paperwork wrong, you will get banned from that country for 5 years.
You can get banned, and it can be for life, not just for 5 years. He's just giving you the rules in Canada if you lie. But you should never lie in immigration. Why would you lie? What's the premise here? I guess he's trying to admonish people not to lie. Well, I would admonish you not to lie too. You have to be truthful. If you have a criminal record, tell people when you apply for a visa. Don't lie about it because they're going to find out.
I'm keen in hearing about, I suppose, the generalized sort of process of actually applying for asylum seeking. And you know, is it really just as direct as, you know, calling Nicholas and then getting the status approved? I mean, it's a lengthy process, right? And am I correct in saying that it involves the United Nations processes in any way?
Oh, dear God. Not asylum. Not asylum, dingbat doorknob. Not asylum. And if you're calling Nicholas Erasmus for help about a refugee program, a lawyer from Canada, first off, you don't need a lawyer to apply for refugee status. It costs nothing. You don't need a lawyer. It's an administrative hearing. It's not a criminal hearing. It's not a lot of judicial law. It's administrative. You do not need a lawyer. Do not go to lawyers. Certainly not to this guy. He's Canadian. And he clearly doesn't know U.S. law. Doesn't know the Immigration Nationality Act from the backside. So, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. Not asylum. And you don't call Nicholas. You don't call any attorney. Good Lord, lady.
In the Canadian context, you have to do what's called a basis of claim. And you have to prove that there's persecution, fear for your safety, whether it's based on race, culture, political affiliation, religious affiliation. It's not as straightforward as just filling out a form. You have to make the case.
Well, thank you, Nicholas, for sharing with us the Canadian standards. We're not talking about people becoming refugees in Canada. You're too busy being selective about who comes in the country with your highly qualified program, which kicks out people who need refugee status and only cherry picks the lawyers, the doctors, the attorneys, the nurses. As far as the U.S., you don't have to prove jack squat because Donald Trump has made a category of people a protected class with his executive order. He's clearly identified a group. He's called them Afrikaners. That will be further delineated. So that's already been proven. But under law, U.S. law, you must demonstrate that you were persecuted, and that's easy to do in the South African context, or fear persecution due to the reasons he mentioned and others. So those people who are Afrikaners, whatever that group will be, have already been identified by the president. He's already made the case for you. So when you go before an immigration judge, which is an administrative position, your case is straightforward. And in most cases should be approved. But we have to wait and see what the constraints of the program are. Man, oh man, thank you for the Canadian law lesson, but it isn't germane here. And you're off the mark once again.
And most countries will take years to investigate your file.
Well, that's possible. But again, that's as an individual applying for refugee status. Say you're that gay man in Damascus. It might take years. It might not. But this isn't that situation. This is a special category of people. Look up the immigration law. Look up how it applies to refugees. You get a priority. And this is a high priority in the list of priorities. That gets complicated in legal speak, but just understand that the president has identified a group of people and he's made this simple for people who fall into that category. Proving your case is not going to take years. And processing you, I have no idea how long the government will take in that. But when this program exists, it won't be hard to prove who you are and you've been persecuted. Donald Trump has done that for you already. Mr. Erasmus, you're off the mark. You're misleading people, giving people the impression that this is difficult and could take years to get. Asylum can take years to get, and you're already safe. You're protected. You're in the United States, or in that case, in Canada, when you apply for asylum, but not in South Africa. But refugee status is very different. And we should mention here once again that 7.6 million people are currently registered refugees in United Nations High Commission for Refugee Status in places like Chad, having fled Darfur, in Kenya, having fled Somalia, and in Uganda, having fled South Sudan, for instance. 7.6 million people technically are ahead of every South African at the front of the queue. But President Trump suspended that program on the 20th of January for at least 90 days for review. In the meantime, on the 7th of February, he directed that a program be established for Afrikaners suffering unjust racial discrimination. And that could happen at any time. So let's focus on facts, not hyperbole, and fear-mongering.
We have to be honest with them and tell them, one, we do Canadian immigration. We can't help you with this. The second thing we tell them is that no details have been announced.
Well, once again, I have to give Mr. Erasmus credit there because you do Canadian, so I don't know why you're on Newsroom Africa answering these questions about a program that you have no expertise over, just generally speaking about things and getting most of them wrong. As far as it taking years to investigate your file, come on, man. Get serious. Get serious. I've already explained that.
And the details are critically important.
Well, indeed, the details are critically important because the details might be as simple as telling you that you can identify it as an Afrikaner. This is supposition. We don't know until we're told by the State Department and Homeland Security. Afrikaner speaks Afrikaans, is a Dutch Reformed Church member, and, whatever, something like that could be as simple as that. Could also include coloreds, Indians, blacks, you never know. And maybe another white South Africans. So we have to wait and see. The devil's in the details. And that's the truth. He got that one right too.
And the third thing we tell them is we're very honest with them in our phone conversations and emails is that this is something you need to very carefully consider if you want to go through this process along with you and your family because it could have serious ramifications for you.
Once again, fear-mongering, serious ramifications. Ramifications what? Because you've been denied refugee status? That isn't necessarily going to prevent you from getting a student visa in the future. It could. But it isn't. Serious ramifications? Well, refugee is serious to begin with. Most refugees have fled their homeland and are in a safe haven, often living in tents in a foreign country. In the case of in-country refugee status, it's granted to a special category and class of people who are in extreme jeopardy. Your life, your liberty at stake here. So, dude, stop the fear-mongering.
When looking at a country like Canada, okay, they come out with altruistic immigration programs to try to attract the best and brightest people around the world because they want them in the country, they need them in the country, and they want them to assimilate.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Erasmus, but I call bullshit. It's not altruistic. It's bullshit. The Economist tried that bullshit 9 or 10 years ago talking about how wonderful Canada's immigration system was so humane and said the U.S. was evil. That's nonsense. Our refugee program takes in 92-year-olds, 2-year-olds, disabled, blind, physically handicapped, people illiterate, anybody. We take them all in because it's compassionate. It is altruistic. Your program is quite the opposite, despite the Economist pimping you and you, Mr. Erasmus, misleading people. The only people who get into refugee status in Canada, by and large, are doctors, lawyers, nurses, dentists, clinicians, people with hard skills that the Canadians want, because you rape and pillage the world by taking advantage of the refugee program and taking the best and brightest, as you just said, and pillaging refugee camps to fill your shortfalls in Canada. Meanwhile, we take on people that become a burden for us because we're compassionate. You're not compassionate. You're not altruistic. You're dishonest, Canada, and that's what's going on here. And this lawyer is misleading you, trying to make you think that Canada is so great and wonderful, when Canada uses refugee program to enrich its society. We do it to help the downtrodden and those in grave situations. There's a huge difference here. Canada is welcome to do what they do, but don't lie about it.
This thing that's come out of the U.S., is it really altruistic? Do they really want you? Are they really trying to help people, the South African people? Or is this a political ploy, cheap political tricks?
A political ploy, cheap political tricks. Well, if there's never a refugee program, then you can make that claim. But short of that, this is just bigotry and hatred of America. The cheap trick here is this interview. This is shameful. This is nonsense. There's no basis to make that claim. Unless you have inside information that we're unaware of. Have you been talking to the National Security Team? Have you been at the White House Situation Room? Do you know something we don't know, Mr. Erasmus? I certainly haven't been there. I can't answer that. But I have no reason to doubt that this is real. There's an executive order. It exists. Trump follows through on his executive orders. Trust me. There's enough Democrats and leftists suing him for all of them. We know he follows through.
That making asylum claims comes with consequences.
Well, yeah, an asylum claim does, but it isn't germane to this conversation. This is an asylum. They're still conflating to confuse you and frighten you and fearmonger. Ridiculous. Utter nonsense.
It does essentially put a mark on your record and will have to be explained.
No, it doesn't put a mark on your record. That's disgraceful and a lie. There's no mark in your record for being a refugee, just like there's no mark in your record for having a visa for visiting a country or having a permanent residency, a leave to remain in the United Kingdom. That's not a mark. That's permission to stay in a country. You're considered a decent person that follows the rule of law, and they welcome you in their country, and you're allowed to stay there on a permanent basis with leave to remain. A green card, permanent residency, the same thing in America. Refugee status means we've accepted you. It's not a mark. Well, there you have it, folks. This is, look, I mean, it's 3 a.m. here. People ask me about this interview. I can't let this pass. Look, I'm not encouraging anyone to leave South Africa, and I'm heartbroken that anyone would feel the need to leave South Africa. But I'm not going to sit here and make decisions for you. That's not for me or anyone else to make. You have to make decisions for yourself. You have to put your big boy pants on and make decisions about your life and about your future. And if this is something that appeals to you, that you feel is necessary to protect you and your loved ones and your future, well, then that's your call, not my call. I didn't ask for this refugee program to be created, and it's not mine to execute. It's up to the Department of State and Department of Homeland Security to do so under the direction of the President of the United States. It's as simple as that. But what I will tell you is that this sort of fear-mongering is dishonest. It's intellectually dishonest. There's no black mark in your record for becoming a refugee. And it isn't germane whether you intend to return to your home country or not, ever. It's only germane to the country that's hosting you as a refugee. Because in theory, refugees are supposed to return home when the factor that pushed them abroad for fear of their life, the war, the regime, political persecution, sexuality, when that ends. But it never happens. Refugees almost never go home. Certainly not voluntarily. This is horrible. I do not believe that the mainstream media, well, I do believe. I know exactly what's going on here in South Africa. The intent is to frighten South Africans. And it's a disgrace. An utter disgrace. Shame on you all. Shame on you all. It's up to you, South Africa, what decision you make. Not me, not this journalist, not this Canadian lawyer, and not the government of South Africa. They have no say in it either. And if they hadn't created the conditions that led to this offer, we wouldn't even be having this video right now. Cheers, South Africa.